Hey everyone. So it is just maybe a minute or two past 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. So maybe we'll give folks another 30 seconds or so to show up, and then we'll get started. Give us maybe another 30 seconds, and then we'll roll. This should be really informal, and hopefully it'll be a nice informal chat between devs. Sarah, are you on?
Yes, I am.
All right, so I guess let's roll. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are in the world, and welcome, and thank you for joining us in this .NET DevChat. Like I said, this should be a really informal half-an-hour session, and we'll show you some cool stuff, hopefully, and we'll take some Q&A. This will be really just a pure dev chat, so we're going to stick to the spirit of the this whole dev chat concept and just do no slides, no fluff. We'll just kind of dive into what we want to talk about. So why don't I bring up just a notepad here, and with me I have my colleague Sarah. So Sarah, why don't you maybe introduce yourself?
Hi, I am Sarah Fatz, and I am on the Telerik team at Progress. I work on our Xamarin products as well as some of our web products as well. And Sam and I have been working on along with many of the folks on the Xamarin team, working on the Tagit application that Sam's going to talk to you about today. And we're very excited about being able to bring together Xamarin and cognitive services and the Telerik UI for Xamarin tools.
Yeah, indeed. So Sarah, you can find Sarah at, both of us are on Twitter. She's at sfats. And then my name is Sam Basu. I'm part of the developer advocate DevRel team here at Progress Telerik. And yeah, we cover all of the .NET tools, but Sarah and me in particular work a lot with Xamarin these days, and that's me on Twitter. So just find us after this webinar if you want to keep chatting. So essentially, let's dive in. We won't do slides, but essentially there are like three big things we want to cover, and we want to show you some real world code. Again, nothing fluffy, no more hello world stuff. We'll actually dive into a code base which is real, and the app is in the App Store and so on. So we want to start things off with Xamarin. And if I can type, we're totally doing this live, by the way. You may hear my kids screaming in the background. I've had several cups of coffee since morning, not much food, so we'll see how this goes. So we'll talk about Xamarin. We'll start things off with Xamarin, kind of see what we're doing and what's the tool set like. And then we're going to dive into some AI, because again, AI and machine learning are big. And we're going to talk about some cognitive services. This is what we're going to use in our app to kind of impart some intelligence into our mobile apps, because that's how we're going to make our apps stand out. Everybody is making mobile apps. How do you make them stand out? So we'll talk about Microsoft's cognitive services, and then we'll talk about Telerik UI. So you want your mobile apps to provide that rich user experience to the user, and one short way of doing it is providing some polished UI in the front end. So we're going to combine these three things together into a real world app, and we're going to go from there. Okay. So let me jump in. Like I said, no slides. We're just going to go off a couple of websites that I'm going to show you, and then we're going to jump into code. So first thing is Xamarin. We are big fans of Xamarin. Even before the Microsoft acquisition, Xamarin is a way for you to build truly native cross-platform mobile apps from a single code base, right? And we know this. We cherish the fact that you are able to write C# and XAML using the tools and the IDs that we are comfortable with, Visual Studio on Windows or on a Mac. And all of that gets compiled down into native bits on iOS, Android, and Windows. So really great place to be. So again, for everything, just like start with Xamarin.com and get the tools. You can see all of their offerings and start from there. I said we won't show slides, but I do want to kind of go back to like a couple of images here to kind of talk you through. So this is the traditional Xamarin approach. This is what we called Xamarin iOS or Xamarin Android. I'm going to maybe make this a little bigger. So you see what we're doing here. We are trying to write the business logic of our app in C#, and we're trying to create three different heads for iOS, Android, and Windows. But we are writing native UI for each of those platforms, which at times is a little hard to do. As a C#.NET developer, I really don't want to know much about iOS and Android. So that's still a legit strategy if you really have to go into the native land. But for me, I like this approach much more. Xamarin.Forms, which is where you also not just you have C# shared abstracted logic, but you also have some shared UI code. And this is a hard problem to solve because three platforms are very different. They have their own ecosystems and their own UI paradigms. If we can abstract away some common things between all of these platforms, then we can maybe write some shared abstracted code in XAML, and then at runtime it gets translated down into native bits for iOS, Android, and Windows. So that's what we're doing. We're going to talk all things Xamarin.Forms today. It is a Xamarin.Forms app that I'm going to show you. This is kind of the home for all things Xamarin.Forms on their web page. You can see what the promise is. You can see how you can take advantage of each of the platforms, when Xamarin iOS is right and when Xamarin native versus Xamarin.Forms, what it's right. So one thing I do want to show you is if you look at the list of controls that they offer you. So when you start building Xamarin.Forms apps, like I said, it's an abstraction that you're building. It's a UI abstraction. You are trying to see what is common between iOS, Android, and Windows. So for example, when you pick a button, when you pick, let's say, a list view, an entry or an image, these are things that are common across all platforms, and behind the scenes they will render the native button, the native list view for each platform, right? So that's what you start with, and then you have a few things to kind of lay out your pages with. Stack layouts, like how do you actually lay out the controls on your pages, and that's how you begin Xamarin.Forms development. Now, if you're building a real-world app, you see like there's about maybe 24 controls that you get out of the box with Xamarin.Forms. Is that enough? Probably not, because most most apps end up using UI that is not part of the box. And this is something Microsoft is okay with because they have bigger fish to fry. They're trying to move the framework forward. They're trying to get you better tools and so on. So is this list of controls enough? Probably not, but then they're expecting the community to step up and fill those gaps. And that's where we come in. We will give you some of the UI that your app needs, so you can have that polished user interface and you can ship your apps faster without having to reinvent all of these controls by hand. So let me get back to the UI part of it in just 1 second. So this is Xamarin.Forms. That's what we're doing. So you get an idea of where to start, get the tools. I'm going to be in Visual Studio pretty much for the rest of the half an hour. But again, Visual Studio for Windows works exactly the same as Visual Studio on a Mac. The dev experience is about the same. Some of the simulators behave a little differently between Windows and Mac. It's a little easier if you're doing iOS development. Being on a Mac is easier because Xcode and iOS are right there. Android, really, there's no difference between Windows and Mac. If you're on Windows, then you do have to have a Mac somewhere, be it in the cloud, be it on your network, so you can deploy your apps, because Apple requires you to build your apps through Xcode, and that's not something anybody can get you around. So you do need a Mac somewhere. Now, let's talk about making apps a little more intelligent, right? And this is where we kind of dip into the whole AI and machine learning. I mean, we as an industry seem to be misusing sometimes, and we make things very broad for ourselves sometimes. Like we did this when we talked about the cloud when it first came out, and now you hear about AI all over. I mean, there are lots of nice places to start off on AI, but essentially, whenever you talk about artificial intelligence, you're talking about a broad gamut of technologies and what the computers and what systems can do for you. And essentially, everybody is trying to do the same thing, but we are picking different slices of it. So AI, by definition, is when you have a system or a computer try to perform the things that you expect out of a human being, right? And that is a really hard thing to do because we humans are pretty intelligent and our brains are very evolved. So my wife, she has a PhD in psychology, and she talks about how advanced our human brain is. If you look at any other mammal, for that matter, and see how quickly their cubs and their offsprings get up to knowing the way of life, like feeding themselves and taking care of themselves. Our kids take a longer time, years before we can call them an adult. And if you're like me, like you're 35 or 36 and you're still not an adult because your brain is not matured enough. But the point is our brains are very matured, and for a computer to try to mimic even some parts of it is hard, right? So we'll take a couple of slices of AI and try to make our apps just a little more intelligent. So, excuse me, there are lots of things that AI encompasses. Machine learning, you can train computers and models to behave like human beings, but there are lots of things that we do as human beings. We speak, we recognize vision, and we talk to each other, we make sense of different things. So how do you get started with all of this? Machine learning and AI is a big realm to get started in. You can start with the tip of the iceberg. You can make this as easy and as hard as it gets on you. So Microsoft has this offering called Cognitive Services, which I'm a big fan of because it really lets you just scratch the surface, where you do not have to know about all of the details, all of the difficult parts about AI. You just get to use it as a service, right? So they have a lot of offerings like Vision. You'll be surprised how difficult it is to just mimic human vision and how we process things in our brain when we see things. So we're going to just use some of the computer vision APIs that Cognitive Services provides. I mean, when you look at AI, it really is, where are we pushing the boundaries of what a computer can do? So we have like self-driving cars today. So AI is anything that we cannot have a computer do right now. But maybe in 10 years, once that thing is in place and everybody has self-driving cars, we won't call it AI. We will just call it regular tech at that point of time. So AI is anything where a computer or an app is doing something that a human does for the first time, and then we're trying to enrich that. So Cognitive Services does a whole bunch of things. You can tap into knowledge to have intelligent recommendations. Language is a whole difficult realm to get into because we have, well, just in English, like English has 26 alphabets, something like Japanese has 10,000 alphabets. So good luck trying to teach machine all of that. So it's complicated. Natural language processing, Microsoft has a lot of services around, they call it LUI, language understanding intelligence services, and just recognizing language and dialects. This is a very hard thing to do, but you can tap into everything that Microsoft has done, because a lot of these things take a lot of computing power, and that's where you kind of fall back to the cloud. There are speech APIs, there are search APIs. So if you have never used Cognitive Services, use this as a nice launchpad to start using AI, because this is where you can just use it as a RESTful API service. You don't need to care about how they're figuring things out in the backend, right? You just get some AI just by doing a service call from your app, right? So the thing that we're going to use in our app is this thing called Computer Vision API, and it's pretty neat. It recognizes emotions, it recognizes people's faces and objects, and it tries to give you what exactly that image is, so you can make more sense of what the user is dealing with. So for example, this is the home of the Computer Vision API. You'll look at anything that they're doing. This one here, like you see they're recognizing faces, their genders, and their ages. And whenever you give it an image, I mean, you don't need to sign up for anything to try this. Just get on this web page, pick a picture from your local drive, and just see what it does. What it comes back to you is a list of descriptions, like what they think the picture is, and then they give you some tags on, like, is this a person, is this an object, and so on. And they will tell you the image format and so on. So maybe just to have a little fun, I think I had an interesting image here. Let's pull that up. This was just a funny image from a time where all of our tech CEOs were at the president's house, and they were trying to discuss strategies. And I think the picture just captures them in just a little bit of a solemn mood. So if we give that thing to Cognitive Services, let's just take a quick look as to what that does. So let's go down here. So it's going to ask for a thing that you can go off, knowing that you are human. There you go. So it can, I mean, obviously identify that faces. They're like people in suits. It does identify Donald Trump, Jeff Bezos, and so on. So it's good. And there are sometimes you hit some of the rough edges, but it's really come a long way. And then there are other things you can do with these APIs. You can read text within images. It can actually read handwriting and convert that over to computer text and so on. And it can recognize celebrities and so on. So this thing is pretty rich, and you can look through their docs and just kind of see how easy it is to consume. And I'll show you this code right in our app. So for example, you can consume this from C# and JavaScript and anything else you want. When you give it a picture, this is essentially what they're coming back with: a detailed list of tags that they think that are in the picture, a description of what the image is, identifying people in the image, and then coming back with some, if it's like sensitive content that you don't want to show, they can tell you that as well. So the request and response is super simple. You essentially create an object, a payload, and you submit that as a post request to a certain URL. Once you sign up for this service, you will have a unique subscription key, so you replace that, so you have your own URL. And then you submit that payload to the URL. You'll see that this is making this one is creating an analysis request, and it's doing a post request to that URL. Right, and once you do that, like this one here, you'll see that it's getting some responses back. Like this is capturing the file stream of the image that we want to submit, and then once we submit, we get some JSON back, which has all of the tags, so we can break it down, and we can do some processing around what that thing means. But essentially, this is the code that you need to call the service, and that's just how easy it is, right? So you notice that we are creating HTTP client here, adding some request parameters to say give us these things, or maybe we don't want the whole thing. And then we say, go ahead and make a post at that URL. So this is the client.postAsync. So that's how you call that that API. So that's what we're using in this app that I'm going to show you. So this is Telerik Tagit, like Sarah introduced. This is an app we are pretty proud of. We worked on this with Microsoft, and it's not a hello world fluffy app. This is in the store. You guys can play with this. It's in the iOS, Android, and Windows stores. It is a simple app, but then if you search for Telerik Tagit, we kind of walk you through how to build a real-world app from scratch, right? So we have all of these articles, like how do you do layout navigation? How do you deal with the image vision APIs? How do you create these other pieces of rating controls and navigation between your pages and so on? And we have laid it all out, and the source code is out there for you guys to look at. So start here, start with Telerik Tagit. Just hit the download Tagit source code, and we can give you all of the code. We are going to put it up on GitHub as well and make it a public directory. But just so if you know, just so if you download that thing, it is just a file that we give you. It's a zip file. And then if you look into the Tagit the directory here, you'll notice that we give you an Android, iOS, and UWP project right here. And if you open up the SLN file, that's the solution file in Visual Studio. So let's take a look. So this is Visual Studio for Mac. And I'm going to open up this solution and walk you through just a little bit of what the magic is under the covers. Sarah, am I missing out saying anything that you can think of?
No, nope, you're spot on, Sam, as usual.
Okay. Oh, thank you. All right, so let's dive into what this thing is. So this is a Xamarin.Forms project, right? It's plain and simple. There are Android, iOS, and UWP projects. I'm on a Mac here, which cannot deal with Windows, so I have actually just hidden the UWP project, but it's there in the source code. You can look into it. So our goal with Xamarin.Forms is try putting as less code as possible in the platform-specific things. But there are some things that do belong in the platform-specific ones. For example, the iOS one, if you look at let's say all of our resources, like these are all the images, right? So when Xamarin.Forms builds your app, it will actually build separate app packages for iOS, Android, and Windows, right? So you have to put stuff like splash screens and anything else like the little thumbnails that belong to each app. Those don't need to go into the respective platform folders, right? But otherwise, everything else we will try to do in this common shared folder. This one here is a portable class library. This is how you share code in Xamarin.Forms. If you have been following the latest Xamarin.Forms evolution, this PCL is now actually a .NET Standards library. It's not the PCL profile anymore, so technically you can take the same, it's not a DLL that it's producing, but you can take this this folder and you can share it on like with your ASP.NET app or your other apps that also talk .NET Standards. So that's where we're getting to. So before we actually jump into this code, let me run this code just so you guys can see this. I'm going to pick the iOS one to run since that's easy here. Let's just run this just to see how it looks like. Now it's going to launch the iOS simulator, and I actually deleted this app for the first time so you can see what the initial experience looks like, because we do one thing that is only for the first time and then we kind of roll into the rest of the app. So this is the iOS simulator loading up, and this is the app. Again, you can play with this app on the iOS and Android and Windows stores. It's saying, hey, this is the first time, can I have access to your photos? You say, okay. What you see here is just a whole bunch of screens. I can swipe around. It just kind of walks you through what this app can do, right? So let me close this and let me show you what just that looks like, and then we'll dive into the rest of the app. So in this code base here, this is a real world code base, right? It's got a fair amount of code here. For sanity, we are using an MVVM pattern, which is model view model. This is XAML and C#, and it works really well with the MVVM pattern. I want to make the distinction of using an MVVM versus an MVVM framework. MVVM is a design pattern, and that does not require any frameworks. So we are actually not including any dependencies with any MVVM framework. We are rolling our own But just things are just organized in a way that makes sense. We have views, we have models, we have view models, and we have helpers, and so on. And if you look through our references, there is no MVVM package that we're bringing in. It's just simply Telerik UI and Xamarin.Forms is what we're using. And we have a few helpers, like there are navigation helpers. There are things that kind of maintain the state. There's a messaging service so we can communicate between view models and so on. So just that first screen that you saw essentially is coming from this view folder here. It's that getting started page. And the only thing that you'll see in this page is a little bit of Telerik UI. So on any Xamarin.Forms project, I can right click here and I can say add packages. And let me scroll up here. I'm already in my NuGet feed. This is official NuGet feed. You can bring in any NuGet library that doesn't have a dependency, or you can go into the Telerik NuGet feed, which is what we host. And then I can just search for Xamarin. And this is our entire Telerik UI for Xamarin suite available to you as one NuGet package. You can get the whole thing, but if you're not using all of the UI, just get some of the light ones. You can just get the chart, just get the list view, and so on. So we are very conscious of the impact that libraries may have on your app package. We want to keep the bloat down to a minimum. So I already have that reference, so I can include some Telerik UI. So right here, you see that in this getting started page, I'm using some XML namespace here to point to the Telerik, the assemblies. And then I can do something like rad slide view, which is essentially that slider thing that you saw up front. And this is really hard-coded in here. If you look at the helpers here, there's a getting started helper. And this one is saying, oh, these are the 5 pages that I want to show once you launch the app for the first time. And then we'll keep track of the fact that you launched it first time, and then we won't show it to you again. So if I go ahead and run this thing again, see, now you see that Telerik Tagit app already being installed, but it has run for the first time, I think. So it shouldn't show me that getting started. So now you're back into the regular app. So let me go ahead and show you this app here. There is a little side bar here, which shows you all of the navigation menus. It's really nice to kind of tuck away your app content. So here it's saying, okay, pick some images. The reason why it asks for your permissions to get into the photos is we want to show you pictures that you have on your phone, or you can actually bring in pictures from the cloud. We have a list of pictures that we can just throw in. So in this case, let's just pick maybe this one here. It's just a waterfall. And then we're going to say go next. And at this point, you see the little bouncing thing. That's a busy indicator because we are actually going off to the cloud. We are going to Azure and saying, here's a byte in a byte stream of this image, right? What can you tell us about this image? So this is the whole tagging part of it. This is where Azure is saying, this is what we think is in the image. And it's going to give us back a whole list of tags. It's possibly going to include mountains and waterfalls. And this is the description of what Azure Vision API, Cognitive Services Vision API told us this image is. It's a waterfall with trees on the side of a mountain, which is pretty accurate, right? It does a pretty good job. Sometimes you see some of the edge cases, but it's very accurate most times, right? So once you have this image tag, you can, this is like a little rating control. You can say, okay, this is a 5-star, and I do want to favorite this, and then it shows up on a favorite list. So if I go down here, this is my gallery, which shows you all of the images that I already have tagged. This is my favorites here. You'll notice that it just has one, and it's showing up here as a circle. I can go do more. So let's just do one more, just to kind of get the hang of it. Let's go back here to our home, pick another image here, maybe this race car here. It is Formula 1. So let's see what Computer Vision API tells us. It's a car on the road. So yeah, I mean, it is a car. It's just not telling you that it's a really race car. So again, 4 stars, and we're going to favorite that. Now we go back into our favorites list, and now you see, well, no, not quite exactly what I was hoping for, but you get the point. I mean, these images show up here in your favorites list, and there are settings here. You can change the theme from being dark or light, and you can load more sample images from our cloud. And then we show you some analysis of what you have done. This one is not going to show you a whole lot because I've just done 2, but once you start doing more images, we'll show you this is what you're looking at. This is where most of your images are tagged as, and then we'll also show you the tags. So these are the tags that are actually Computer Vision API tells us once we give it an image. So all of the tabs are listed out here in a little pie chart. So these are some of the Telerik UI pieces that really light up your app. That's a slide view and so on. So let's kind of maybe quickly look into what this code looks like and how we pull this all together. So this is our homepage. This is where things start out. So this is the thing that I was talking about. This is the rad side drawer, right? This is the one that gives you that hamburger icon, and then you can slide it from the top. You can do left, right, whatever you want. And then inside of it is a list view. This is the list view that is rendering this screen here. When I go into home, well, actually more so like maybe the timeline view. This one shows you like a calendar and things that I've done on certain dates in the calendar. So if I keep doing more things, it'll show up here on the calendar. It really gets the UI really shines when you have been using this app for a while. You see all of the things that you have done on a certain calendar. So that's the UI, and this is the rad list view, which first shows you a list of images that you have. You see how easy things are, and you see some of the things that we're doing. We are doing an MVVM pattern, so we don't have buttons in our code behind, like button code handlers. There's a commanding behavior that we are using. So if you look into, again, I mean, you guys have access to this entire code base, so I'm not going to waste a whole lot of time going into each of the nitty-gritty details, but I will show you just some of the pieces that are important. So let me go into this. Let's see. We have some common things, which is like this is our tagging service URI, and that's our key. So hopefully you're not copying it down, and that's our sample image URL, so we can pull down some images. And then we go into, let's just see, these are some of our commands, relay commands, so we can handle button clicks, and there are event handlers on each of the view models. Let's go back and show you the actual image handling part of it, right? So let's go into images here. No, the services part is what I want to show you. So this is our image service. Essentially, it says this is what we offer you. There's a save image, there's a get image file, and then we can save the tagged images and see what you're doing. This is a computer vision service interface. Essentially, we are requiring iOS and Android to do slightly different things, but I mean, they end up doing the same thing. They end up calling the same API behind the scenes. So there's an analyze image async, which you can just give it a byte array of the image that you already have on disk, or if you want to point it to a URL, we can also do that. So once you do that, we can go ahead and reach out to Vision API and actually make that service call. So let me go into iOS project here, actually show you what that does. Because essentially, once you roll this, this is using a dependency injection. So it'll pick up the computer vision service that's been implemented on iOS and on Android and on Windows. They're essentially the same thing, but with a little bit of variation on each one. So if I go look at the services implementation in iOS, this is the implementation. This is what we are looking into. There is an analyze image async, and there's a by the byte array, by the URL, and so on. This is what the Vision API needs. There are some subscription key headers. Essentially, we are building up that REST request, and then we fire it off and we see what we get back. So all of this is implemented here in a helper. So if you look into the analysis helper, this is the call that we are making. And then let's take a look at where we are actually implementing this call. So let's look at this analyze image async. I'm going to do a quick search here to kind of show you what that call looks like. This is where we actually process the image analysis. So you'll notice that we are creating all of these, like the tab pages, and then once we're done, we are going to make a service call to Vision API. Let me make sure if I'm showing you the right thing. That's our service. This is the one on iOS. All right, so you notice what we're doing here. This is where we're calling into get image analysis async with a byte array, if you already have a picture in hand. And then we're building up this URL that we want to point to. This URI comes from this cognitive services base URI. On top of it, we are saying go to Vision 1.0 analyze, and then visual features is this collection of analysis features, which is what do you exactly want the Vision API to come back with? Do you want the tags? Do you want the description, and so on, so on? So that we build all of that up, and then this payload is essentially our byte array. This is our picture, and then we go ahead and say go ahead and post that picture. And then once you are done, get that content back out of Vision API, excuse me, and then read the JSON that comes back from it. So that's essentially what we're doing. And you can, again, look through exactly the code. That's the slight difference that you have in iOS and Android. Otherwise, there is not a whole lot of anything weird anything particular that we're doing. You see us doing the tab view when we show the tabs. Lots of these pages would have a busy indicator, especially when we're actually calling into the REST API, the Vision API. This is the rad busy indicator, which shows you that bouncing thing. So that, I mean, always show something to the user when you're making a service call, so the UI remains fluid and you can still interact with that, but the user knows that you are actually making a service call and pulling something down from the internet. All right, so let me see. We are just about 11:30. So Sarah, if you're back on, anything else you want to talk about? Any questions that we have?
We can certainly open it up for questions. You have another 15 minutes. If we don't have questions, if there's something, a specific aspect of the application that somebody wanted to see, please shoot us a note either in chat or questions. And Sam, if you have anything else, it doesn't look like we have any. Oh, here we go.
Well, a couple of things that we can address right away is I see folks asking if the webinar is going to be recorded and available. So yes, in all of my glory of my beautiful voice, you can you can have a recording, and we'll put it up as soon as we can.
Absolutely.
All right. So yeah. So while this thing is running again, I mean, play with this app and see things for yourself. I think it's what it does is just gives you a real world look into how we put together an app when we are building professional Xamarin.Forms apps. So maybe I can show you a few more things. Sarah, were you going to say something?
I was just going to say one thing. You do have one question. Somebody's asked the Vision API. They said there's a Vision API provided by Google, or do they need to create the custom API? And this API, I mean, go ahead, I'll let you answer that.
Yeah, I mean, so we fell back to using the Azure Cognitive Services API. I have not personally used the Google Vision API, but I'm sure like others have similar APIs. And this is all kind of comes down to using services that introduce AI and machine learning in your app to make things a little more intelligent. So you don't have to use any of these services unless it fits your purpose. Feel free to use something like Alexa. I'm sure like Siri has some services. So anything that makes sense for you guys to call into. Machine learning is a big thing to get into. We are really just touching the tip of the iceberg and using things as a service, not knowing what's happening behind the scenes. So again, Alexa does natural language processing, so does cognitive services. You can have the user speak something and try to make sense of what they're doing. We are kind of really picking just one small slice of the cognitive services and trying to make sense of what images are. And you can tag things much more easily. You can those tags become searchable, so you can find images. I mean, all of us, once we use our phone for like years, we end up with a huge photo library that's really hard to search on, right? So tagging is a great way in which you can, I mean, you can actually use this app to tag things that you have in your library, so you can find pictures a little more easily. And I think, I mean, most of the services, when you look at what Amazon, what Azure, and what everybody else is trying to do, is trying to ease the barrier to entry so that you can use these services as easily as possible from JavaScript code, from C# code, and everybody essentially is talking RESTful services. So you essentially make a RESTful call with a payload, and they'll give you something back. So it's just as simple as making a web service call from your app.
Sam, we did have a request, and I'm not sure if this is where you were going because it looked like you were getting ready to show a little bit more code, but somebody did ask if there was if you had an opportunity to show a little more of the chart section of the app.
Charts, okay. I can try doing that. So let's see, there's timeline, search, picker, let me find the right view. Analysis view, I think is the one. So when you look at charts, essentially you're talking about like this one here, where we're throwing in a little radial gauge, and then the tags are shown here in a little pie chart. So this is here the XAML that renders it. So you'll notice that there is right up front, there is a grid that we are putting together. The grid essentially says, here's how I want to lay out the content on my page. So I think it has like two little rows and columns. So one column here is clearly the rad tab view, which is rendering the two tabs that you see for the two categories, and it is data bound to this thing called categories. And we are feeding it either the tabs or what was the thing, the categories that are coming up. And inside of it, you see the Telerik rad radial gauge. This one is, again, using MVVM, so there's a binding context, and it is tied to this current category analysis. And then inside of it is just more ways of setting up the gauge. Like, what do you want the axis to say? That's one. And then let's scroll down to the other one. Let me show you the pie chart here. That's all the radial gauge bar that's been set up. And this is the other tab view, which is actually showing you the tags. And this one here is a rad pie chart. This one, if you notice, it's actually going off here, and it should be data bound to something here on our side. Okay, so there is a tag breakdown that it's bound to, and this is all being fed from. So I mean, this is just a simple MVVM pattern, right? So if you look at the code behind, there's hopefully not much code that we're adding, so just literally nothing here. It's just initializing it. So if you look into the code view model here, analysis view model, it may end up using one or two views, but this is where it's getting all its data from, right? So there's a couple of observable collections. There's a collection for all of the tags, and there's a collection for all of the categories. So we bring that down, and then let's see what we're doing here. If it's more than 3, we'll try to break it down a little bit further, and all of these tags are coming. So essentially, when we make those service calls, we are kind of holding on to the tags that we get back from the Vision API for all of the images that you're tagging, and that are being held in a Vision in the home view model, and then we are storing it to files. So all of these tags become just things that we can search on, right? So that's where we are getting the data from on this view. So if we look into the analysis helper, this doesn't do anything other than just analyze the image. Let's see, there's a storage helper. This kind of shows you like how we are storing things, the first run and so on, how we're actually saving the favorites. Again, these kind of go back into a little bit of how the storage is implemented on each platform. You can use a plugin, so you get a cross-platform way of storing files on disk, be it iOS or Android, or in this case, we are using a dependency service and letting iOS and Android do their own thing. So we're saving those images to file. Let's take a look at what else I can show you here. That's nothing here. Navigation. So I didn't show you the navigation pattern here because anything that starts up, it starts up here in the home view model. So let's start with the app XAML actually. So this is where our app starts up, right? This is the first thing that app processing happens. We have a whole bunch of resource dictionaries here. And then this is where we say we're going to use an animation to kick things off. And then if you look at what the app XAML.cs does, and then we'll kind of dive into what the initial navigation is. So it says, hey, I'm going to use this main view model here, and then I'm going to new up this navigation service, right? So the main page is our home page, and from there on, it's going to be view model to view model navigation. So if you look at what the home page view model does, it just sets up a whole bunch of things. It gives you the navigation menu, so we can feed that side drawer that's been instantiated, and it instantiates a whole lot of these I commands, which are implemented as relay commands for view model to view model navigation. And then it sets up these observable collections, some of them, and how do we toggle things on and off, navigation from menu. And this is where we're initializing all of our items, right? So each of them is a navigation item. So there's a home, there's a gallery, which shows you a list. There's a timeline, which shows you the calendar view. This is the analysis view, which shows you the charts. And then this is the list of favorites, and this is the settings. So all of these things are essentially one navigation item each, and then we navigate between them back and forth as you are using our app, right? So this is the first run, and it's going to push a thing on your app that says you're run this for the first time, so we don't need to show you the slide view that shows up for the first time. All right, so that's home view. Any other questions we got, Sarah?
Yeah, we have, somebody's asked, is there a clear defining line between what gets put in PCL and platform app? You mentioned PICs, but also services.
Okay, so this is up to you, right? So I mean, this is a code base where this is a real world code base. There are some things we are really proud of. Maybe there are some things we can improve on. But ideally, you would want all of your platform specific logic to only be in the platform specific projects if there is no cross-platform implementation of those things. So I think the reason we had to kind of break off a little bit into iOS and Android and have a little bit of implementation in both is because of the differences in which how we are creating the payloads and how we are grabbing the file from storage on iOS and Android. So that's where each of them have their own service implementations, and we're doing a dependency injection to just grab the right service implementation before we call off the APIs. But just the calling part of it, just the RESTful part of it, that's the same. And in terms of like what you put in your PCL, like if you create a new Xamarin.Forms project in Visual Studio today, this shared directory is no longer a PCL. This is a .NET standard, and it is .NET standard 2.x compliant, I want to say, and that automatically opens up for reuse. Because I mean, Xamarin.Forms out of the box is not using any .NET APIs that are only tied to Windows. It's doing so in a cross-platform way, and you should be able to share that code and have it portable across other frameworks as well. Like tomorrow, if WPF comes and says we support .NET Standard 1.x, you can say, hey, my .NET Standard compliant Xamarin.Forms app also speaks the same dialect, and then we can share some DLLs and some common code. All right, so let's see what else we have. More of the chart section, we talked about that. What about controls except Xamarin.Forms? I'm not entirely sure I understand. So essentially what we talked about, like if you did Xamarin native, where you're building truly native heads on top of the shared abstracted C#, then your controls are essentially native controls on iOS, Android, and Windows. Oh, so one thing I actually can show you, and this may be interesting. So if I go back here to where I was showing you just the initial way of how we do the apps. Let's go back here. We're not going to open up the PowerPoint. But let me show you this image one more time. So when we are doing Xamarin.Forms, we are doing a shared abstracted UI code, right? Now, when we write things in an abstracted way, like list view or buttons or anything that's common across all platforms, there's a renderer behind the scenes that renders the native UI for iOS, Android, and Windows on each platform, right? And you get to customize that renderer to make it your own if you needed that variation. So, for example, in our app, if you go back here to Visual Studio, and if I pull back the app again, I think what you saw in this favorites thing is this one is not saving in favorites yet. So let me go ahead and do a save. Go back to gallery. Let's see if the favorites thing shows up. Not yet. So let me actually kill this thing. I'm not sure what's going on. So let's fire this up one more time. Stop it. All right. All right, let's actually pick a different one here. Maybe this guy is skateboarding. And we're again calling off to the Vision API. You see the balls bouncing here. That's the busy indicator, young man riding a skateboard, which is pretty accurate. So let's go ahead and do that, and let's actually save it. And let's see if it shows up here in the favorites thing. It does. Okay, and actually pulled up the one that I did just a while back. So this is where you see the favorites list here. This is a Telerik list view. So let me show you what that implementation looks like. If you go into the favorites view here in XAML, that's the page I'm looking at, favorites view XAML. This one here is just a list view, but it has a fancy data template or an item template, so to speak. Like exactly how that item looks like in our view is a little bit of a custom rendering, right? So that's our list view. Up front is an image, and then we have a couple of things. This is the circle image that we're using, right? And then it has a few more text pieces to it. It's bound here to a couple of text pieces, right? So this circle image is actually a custom renderer. So that's what I was trying to get to. If I go into the common here, let me see if I can find that. Behaviors, nope. Controls, okay. So there's a circle image here that we're using. This one here, it's one of our custom controls. And then if you look into the iOS project or the Android project, you'll find the custom renderer that we're using. So in the renderers project here, you'll notice that there is a circle image renderer. And this one here is doing a little bit of magic here, a little bit of mathematical magic here to say, here's an image, but we don't want to show the image as a square or the way we showed it in the list view. Let's add some borders to it so that it shows up like as a rounded image, right? So that's the circle image. And you notice how we are doing this. This is a cached image renderer, and it is implemented here as a circle image renderer for iOS and then for Android and so on. So no matter what platform you're on, this favorites view kind of looks a little fancy. All right, so I think we're running up a little short of time here, but let's see if there are any other questions we can answer.
There was one more question, Sam. Somebody did ask if you have time for this, can you show how the styles or CSS things are done?
The styles for the images, or how we are showing it in the list?
Ravi, if you can provide a little bit of additional detail in the question area, we can certainly do that. While we're waiting for that, there is another question that says, is there a similar feature to rad list and rad grid for expansion of item to show details or larger items on the same screen?
Yeah, I mean, all of this is controlled through item templates. I mean, so this is like, let me show you the thing here. This is the home page for Telerik UI for Xamarin. So you can look through all of the controls that we have, the charts, the list view, and the gauges. All of them will support item templates, like in particular, like the data grids, the list views. Those are great at supporting item templates. And essentially, what you see us doing is in any of the UI. Let's just pick maybe the. Let's see, we can pick maybe the details page. This is a page we haven't looked at. You look at what we are doing here. Let me find, this one doesn't actually have the list view. So let me find one that has the list view here. So this one is using the list view, right? And it is using a few things in the list view. There's a behavior that that kind of toggles the state of some of the UI, and then once you tap on it, that's a commanding behavior. So we can launch the corresponding thing on the view model to kind of handle your tap event. But the other thing that you notice, I mean, Sarah, you mentioned like CSS. I mean, there's no CSS in particular. This is .NET. I mean, there's no web involved here. But one thing you will see is in our app.xaml. There's a whole bunch of resources that we're using, things that we are using to customize the look and feel. Like there's a whole bunch of like color palettes that we use, and really just the circle image is the only like styling thing that we're doing with some of the custom borders. But otherwise, everything is like nice and squared. It's as it comes out of the box, and we're using our own colors and certain themes to kind of customize the look and feel of it. All right, so let's see, anything else we can talk about?
I think if there aren't any other questions, I think I would certainly encourage you all, if you haven't already, to download the source code. And Sam put our Twitter handles up there earlier. Feel free to reach out to either one of us at any time if we can answer any additional questions. We're here for you.
One last thing to kind of maybe end things. Someone asked about pricing. So is there a price to using this AI services? I mean, yes and no, right? Yes, because it's not entirely free. Like for example, cognitive services, if you look at their pricing, the emotion APIs and some of the tagging things that we're getting back, up until, let me see. So up until like 30,000 image transactions per month is free, right? And beyond that, you start paying. If you get beyond that, I mean, that's a happy place to be. You're getting people to use your app, and you're calling so many times into the API services. So yes, it's not entirely free, but again, once you start paying, your app is well on its way to becoming very successful, and you'll want to pay Azure or any other service at that point of time. So I mean, feel free to tap into anything else that you guys want to. This is an app that's showcasing the use of Vision API with some polished Telerik UI in the front end. If you want to tap into Alexa, if you want to tap into anything Google has to offer, feel free, because I mean everybody is trying to get into this game, and I think AI is the way in which apps will start making their mark, and they'll start getting more intelligent, and that's how you can amaze your users by showing things that you normally don't expect out of a computer. So again, there are lots of processing, there's lots of magic happening behind the scenes. You just end up making a RESTful API call and let Azure, let Google, and let Amazon figure things out for you. So I think that's all we had. Hopefully this was a fun little half an hour of chatting. Again, we are, you can find us, our suite of products here at Telerik UI for Xamarin, and then Telerik Tagit here is the one thing that you want to take home. All of this is done for you guys. This is all open source, and you can get all of the source code that I showed you today. Even if you don't want to look into the source code first, like to get started, just download the app, like from the stores, play with it and see how it tags the images that you have in your photos directory and how things become searchable. The analysis view with the charts and graphs, that gets to be, I mean, it comes to life once you start doing it a lot more. I mean, I kind of installed the app for the first time on my simulator, so you didn't see a lot, but the more you do it, the more it shines. So play with the app, play with the source code, and again, Sarah and me are here to answer any of your questions, and feel free to reach out to us at any time. So with that, I think that's all from me, Sarah.
Yep, that's all for me as well. Hope everybody has a wonderful rest of their week.
Yep, and enjoy Thanksgiving, and thank you again so much for taking an hour of your time to come and join us. So appreciate all of you guys, and thanks so much again. Bye for now.
Thank you. Goodbye.